Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. Today we're going to be creating some primitive Halloween decor using the Munbyn Portable Thermal Printer. This is their A4 thermal printer. It does not require a printer cartridge, so it's already very cost effective. Setup was super easy. I just began by unpacking everything. There are easy to follow instructions and manuals included in this. You also have a little USB option here in case you want to transfer your files for printing in a different way. You've got your power cable obviously, and then I'm just going to pull the cover off. And it's basically a plug and play. I just basically plugged it into the power, and now I'm going to use the QR code that is on the inside of the box, and I'm going to download that app to my iPhone. And then once I'm in there, I am going to be using Bluetooth to connect the printer to the app. It was super quick, all in probably only about 10 minutes. I'm then going to be using the Munbyn Premium Thermal Paper. I'm going to take that out, tear it off, and I'm going to feed it into the printer. I'm then going to navigate to my photos, and we're going to start off with this cute little ghost. And we're going to print out this very basic template using the Munbyn printer so that I can get a fabric pattern to make cutting out and sewing that pattern a lot easier. As you can see, it is printing super fast. This is in real time. Now, this is a very basic image. I just needed it as my sewing pattern. It can definitely do a lot more detailed printing. I'm then going to iron out just some simple white cotton fabric, just so it's nice and flat. And then I'm going to trim out my pattern that I printed out, cut that to size, and then I'm going to position that over the top of the paper, and then I'm going to use my scissors to cut around it. Now I am going to leave about a 1 centimeter edge around there so that I've got room for the seam. I'm going to be repeating this process twice. We obviously need 2 pieces, exactly the same. You can see here I've already organized that. I'm then going to layer that one on top of the other, and then I'm going to pin the template in place. Now, this thermal paper is thinner than your regular printing paper. So I was able to go around here. I'm just hand sewing for the first project. I was able to go around here, use the template as a guide, and then here I'm very easily able to tear that off without damaging my stitches. I then turned my little ghost inside out, and I'm going to add some hobby fill using a pencil to work that hobby fill into those tricky to reach areas, and then I'm going to hand stitch that closed. Once I finished with that, I just took out a Sharpie and I am simply going to draw on the ghost face. You could cut out black fabric and sew that on for the face, or use perhaps an iron-on vinyl. This was just the easiest option for me. I then cut a length of twine so that we could wrap that around the ghost's neck, and then I'm going to create my own little label out of some scrap drop cloth. I'm just going to cut that to size, and then I'm going to fray the edges to give it a primitive worn look, and then I just simply wrote the word boo on with my Sharpie. I then added some hot glue to the twine and glued the label on. I'm then going to use my wax brush just to add a little bit of brown wax to give it more of a vintage, primitive, worn feel. And here's a look at our finished ghost. This was a quick and easy project, and having that printed pattern made life so much easier. For my second project, I'm going to be printing out a pattern or a template for a witch's hat. I'm going to start with printing out the brim of the witch's hat using my Munbyn printer. Again, this made it super easy and quick. I think it would have been a little bit tricky to freehand this and get it looking exactly right. So I'm going to print out the hat brim first, and then I'm going to print out the top section of the witch's hat. And this is from an online site that I will link in the description below. And having this pattern, again, it just makes it so much easier. I'm not worrying about scale. I can just print it off really easily and get to work. Just remember to keep your thermal paper out of direct sunlight or it can turn yellow. I'm then going to use my scissors to cut out both of these templates, just simply cutting them out so that we can use them as a guide. I'm then going to lay them on top of some black fabric. I'm going to pin them in place to make cutting out the template a lot easier. Again, I am leaving that approximately 1 centimeter extra length around the outside. And then I used that hat template again, and I'm going to trace around it onto some cardboard, and I'm going to cut that out. This is going to be going underneath the hat brim fabric to give it some stability. So I'm going to flip that over, and then I'm just going to use my hot glue gun to go around the edge and glue the fabric in sections down. I'm going to be pulling it tight each time so that it's on there nice and firm, and I'm going to make sure it's all secured in place. Next, I'm going to work on the top part of the hat. I'm going to use my sewing machine to sew together the 2 edges of that particular pattern design, and then when I'm done, I'm going to be pulling it inside out. And once I have trimmed off that excess cotton, I'm going to begin adding some of that hobby fill. So this is going to give the top part of the hat some form and some shape. If you didn't want to use hobby fill, you could use cardboard on the inside. I'm then going to attach the top section to the bottom section of the hat with hot glue, just adding little bits of glue around the base section. I'm then going to cut a length of some jute webbing that I had in my stash. So this is a bit thicker than, say, your ribbon. It's often used in chairs. So I'm just going to cut that to length, cut it in half, and now I'm going to glue it onto my hat and then glue the 2 pieces that meet in place as well. I'm going to be using this vintage style lace that I had in my stash, wrapping it around and then tying it in a knot. Obviously, we're going for more of that primitive feel, so I'm going for vintage and rustic looking pieces like this lovely little jingle bell that I have there. I'm going to add some hot glue to that, and we're going to glue it to the top section of the hat. Next, I'm going to cut out a square piece of just some plain calico fabric. I'm going to fray the edges, and then I'm going to take out some of my IOD typesetting stamps. We're going to be using the numbers 31, obviously for the 31st of October, Halloween. I'm going to ink that up, and then I'm going to press that down on the fabric. I'm then going to be using some hot glue to secure the little label to the hat. The webbing that I used left a lot of fibres, so I'm just going to use a lint roller here to go in and remove that from around the brim of the hat. I'm then going to be adding a piece of grapevine wreath, and I'm just going to trim that to size. I want that wrapping around the edge of the hat, bring in some natural elements, and then I'm just going to use some hot glue to attach that where I want it to go. Just adding little beads of glue around the edge where I have it attached, and then I'm going to trim off the excess. Next, I'm going to be adding some dried baby's breath that I had in my stash, just adding little sprigs of that on the right-hand side and on the left-hand side as well. I then took out some jute ribbon. I'm going to make 2 loops and tie that in a bow. And then once I'm happy with the look of that, I'm going to trim the excess off there, and I'm going to use hot glue to glue it in place. I want this to have more of an aged and worn appearance, so I'm just using some of my Dixie Dirt here to age it up a bit. You can use shavings from chalk pastels instead. And here's our mini witch's hat. I love how this turned out, and having the plans for this project definitely helped me get the scale right. For my third project, I'm going to be printing out this Witches Boot template that I found online. It's just a free template. And again, I'm just going to send that file to the Munbyn printer. It's going to print it off for me. Now, this wasn't quite the size, or the top part of the boot wasn't exactly the size that I wanted, but that's okay. We're going to adapt it. I love the rest of the shape of this, so it's very helpful to have that printed template. I'm going to cut it out, cut it to size so that I can use it to help me cut the right shape of fabric. And I'm going to be doing 2 boots, so I'm going to actually have to cut out 4 versions of this. So I am doubling up the fabric for 1 boot, again leaving that approximate 1 centimeter gap around the edge. And then when I get to the top section here, I'm going to continue cutting all the way to the top so we can make it a bit of a longer boot that goes a bit higher up. I'm then going to be using my little mini sewing machine to stitch around the outside. So I just basically kept the edge of my little sewing guide there on the template, and again that really helped me be able to achieve a lovely shape and a more realistic look as well. I'm then going to remove all the pins, and I'm able to very easily remove the pattern. I'm then going to turn the boot inside out, again using that pencil to help me get into some of those trickier areas, and then I'm going to be adding some of that hobby fill. Now I have mentioned this before, I tend to use a pillow, a brand new pillow. I pull that apart and I use that for my stuffing. It's just a bit more cost effective. I'm going to fill both of the boots, and then I'm just going to hand sew the top sections closed, just using some black thread for this part. To create the laces for the boots, I'm adding a bead of hot glue on one of the boots, and then I'm just using this trim that I had in my stash. I'm going to add some glue across the other side, and then I'm going to pull the trim there over and then use my scissors to cut it to size. I'm just going to be using bits of this trim so that I don't use too much of it. I can make it go a bit further, and I'm going to continue adding beads of glue and then adding it diagonally as well. So we're creating the look of those laces. Now I loved this trim. This is something that I thrifted for just a couple of dollars. I got it in a bag of trim, so it was very cost effective, but I do know that this type of trim can be a bit expensive if you buy it brand new. So another option for this is twine. Twine would definitely look great. It would definitely look rustic and primitive, or really just any ribbon that you have lying around would be perfect for this. So I'm just going to continue applying the glue, adding that trim, and then I took out these simple gold thumbtacks, and I'm going to use those for the buttons or whatever you want to call them at each of those points. And I'm loving how the gold thumbtacks are going with that gold trim. I'm using hot glue to attach the trim pieces, but you could definitely sew this in if you wanted it to be a little bit more professional. Maybe you want to make these to sell. I'm happy to use that hot glue, and it was just an easier option for me. Once I have all those trim pieces in position, I'm going to use the thumbtacks on each of those points to give it a more finished look. And I'm going to repeat the same process for the other boot as well. Next, I'm going to add some doilies that I thrifted. I've got two that are matching, and I'm just going to sort of gather those up, and I'm just going to use a needle and thread to hand sew those into place. I'm sort of imagining that maybe these are almost like the top of the witch's socks or things like that. When I was doing research for this, I saw a few that had like the witch's stockings poking out the top of witch's boots, but I liked this. It was something that I had in my stash. I think I only paid maybe 50 cents per doily, so very cost effective. So I'm adding them to both of the boots. I then decided that I wanted to extend the laces, so I decided to do one more of those crisscrosses up the boot on each of them. I'm also going to add a little bit of glue up the top on the doilies to give the look of pleats. I then took some more of that gold trim. I'm going to make 2 loops and tie that in a bow, and I'm going to be adding those bows to the back top left-hand sides of the boots on each of them, and I'm just hot gluing that in place. Just in case someone wants to hang these, I'm going to thread some twine through some of the holes in the doilies on each of the boots. I'm going to tie the boots together and then tie a knot in the twine so that they can be easily hung off a hook on the wall. We are going for that primitive Halloween look, so I'm going to take out some more of that Dixie Dirt in Earth, and I'm going to add that over the boots to give them a worn vintage look. And here's a look at our witches boots. This was such a fun project. Let me know what you think of these in the comments. Next, I'm going to be printing out this Candy Corn template using the Munbyn Thermal Printer. I'm just going to send that file over. It's going to print it out. And then once it's finished printing, I'm going to be using my scissors to trim that out. Again, we are using this as a sewing pattern. I think it would be a little bit tricky to get this shape perfectly right if you didn't have this sort of a pattern. So it's definitely made my life a lot easier having this little portable printer. I'm just cutting out the fabric to size. Then I'm going to be using some pins to attach my pattern to the surface there, and then I'm going to use my sewing machine to go around the edge. Now, anytime I'm doing my sewing, I always make sure that I leave a little gap so that I can add that hobby fill. I'm going to tear that pattern off. Again, you're able to do this really easily because that thermal printing paper is a lot thinner than your traditional paper. And then I'm going to turn it inside out after trimming off that excess cotton. Next, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Spanish Sunrise Mineral Paint. I'm just going to be adding that down the bottom. Obviously, we want those traditional colors of yellow and orange. I'm using my mister to water down the paint a little bit to help it get into that calico fabric fiber. I'm going to be painting one side at a time, obviously. I'm then going to use Firelight by Paint Couture. This is going to be our orange for the center part. You probably could have painted the different pieces of fabric while they were still separate before you sewed them together, but I thought this was a bit easier to get the different sides to match if I had them already together. I'm then going to be just using Buttercream Chalk Paint by Paint Couture for the top section, and obviously I'm going to be repeating this same process on the other side of the candy corn fabric once this side is dry. I'm then going to be using Hobby Fill to fill my candy corn, filling it so that it's nice and plump, and then I'm going to use those same colors just on the edges so that we don't have any gap in those colors. I obviously didn't have all these different colored fabrics, so this was a great way for me to be able to create this, but you could definitely use the colored fabrics instead. I'm then using some of that Dixie Dirt to give that primitive aged look, and then I'm going to be using my IOD Apothecary stamps. I'm just spelling out the word candy, adding that to a plastic mount, and then I'm going to be using some IOD permanent ink. I'm going to be adding this to that simple little cardboard tag that I have there, the word candy first, and then I'm going to rearrange the letters into the word corn, just like before, adding that ink and then pressing that down. Once I had that image all ready to go, I then took out the same ink pad and I'm just going to run it around the edges of the label. Now, you don't have to use stamps. You could definitely hand write this on. I'm then going to wrap twine around the candy corn about 3 times. I'm then going to trim off that excess and then tie a knot, and then I'm going to thread the candy corn label through, and then I'm also going to thread through this little rustic bell. I'm going to tie another knot, and then I'm going to tie a simple bow. And here's a look at our primitive candy corn. I love how this turned out. It definitely has that primitive feel. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. Finally today, I'm going to be printing out this very simple pumpkin template on the Munbyn Thermal Printer. This is going to be a great guide for me. I'm actually going to be cutting out 3 of these. I'm then going to trim that template to size, and then I'm going to use that as a guide to cut out the fabric. Obviously, I'm going to be cutting out 2 pieces for each of the pumpkins. I'm then going to pin that in place so that I can use it as a guide when I'm doing my sewing. I'm going to run it through my sewing machine. And again, just having that template made it so much easier. And then I'm going to pull that inside out, and I'm going to do that 3 times. I'm then going to be inserting some hobby fill, again using a pencil for any of those tricky areas, and I'm going to be doing that for each of the pumpkins. And then I'm going to take some of that jute webbing that I used before, and I'm going to be using that to create some stalks. So I'm cutting a rectangle, then cutting part of it on an angle, and then I'm going to use some hot glue to attach that to the top section, and then I'm going to add another piece on the other side so that it's double-sided, and then I'll just use glue around the edges to make sure that's all in place. And again, we're going to do that on each of the pumpkins. Next, I'm going to be using those Apothecary label stamps again to spell out the word trick. I'm going to cut out a length of drop cloth to create a label. I'm using my permanent black ink by IOD on the stamps there, and then I'm going to press that into the drop cloth. I'm then going to use the same stamps to spell out the word treat. Obviously, I've only got one letter T, so I've left that one off the end. I'm going to cut another fabric label there to size. I'm going to stamp down part of the word treat, and then once I have that down, I'm going to take off that letter T, add some ink to that, and then I'm going to put that in position so we can finish off that word. I then need to spell out the word or, so I've got that organized, and I'm going to add that to another fabric label there, and then I'm going to lift that up. Now I'm going to go around the edges of each of those labels, fraying them, and then once I'm happy with how that looks, I'll trim off any of the really long ends that look a little bit odd, and then I'm going to add some dabs of hot glue to each of the corners of those fabric labels, and I'm going to stick that on the pumpkin. I'm going to have it sort of off to the side there, not perfectly straight. I'm then going to cut the label or down to size so it's a little bit smaller, add some glue, position that in place, glue it down, a little bit repetitive, and then the same instructions for the word treat. I'm then going to cut some lengths of twine, and I'm going to be tying that around the top stalk section of the pumpkin, tying a knot and then tying a bow. I'm going to repeat the same process for each of them. Finally, to age these up, I'm going to add a little bit of that Dixie dirt. And here's a look at our trick or treat pumpkins. This was a quick and easy project, and they definitely make great bowl fillers. I really hope that you've enjoyed today's video, and I want to thank Munbyn for sponsoring today's video, sending me that amazing thermal printer. It would have been a lot harder to create these beautiful projects without it. Let me know if you had a favorite project from today. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you would like to get your own Munbyn printer, make sure you check out the links and coupon codes in the description below. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find most of the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.